This episode is brought to you by Lumina Growth Lab. At Lumina, we help professional learning and development consultants who are struggling with steady lead flow, consistent bottom line revenue, and scalability so they can finally have healthy margins, make more strategic decisions, and ultimately take their business to the next level. Most of the time, our clients come to us frustrated because nothing seems to work outside of word of mouth and referral based growth. But with the right strategy and support, they're able to confidently add new channels of lead generation and create sustainable revenue and year over year growth for cheaper than ever before because of the use of AI technologies. If that sounds like you or someone you know, connect with me on LinkedIn and I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about unlocking your business's potential. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to the Marketing Matrix, everybody. My name is Lisanne Murphy, and I'm your host today. I'm so excited to be joined by the wonderful and talented Mr. Eugene Dilan. Eugene, thank you so much for coming on to the Marketing Matrix today.
I'm excited to be here and excited to do this episode with you, Lisa Ann.
Guys, I met Dilan recently, and as I was speaking to him, I just knew that I needed to bring him to a wider audience. His realness, his authenticity, and his amazing journey is very, very inspiring, and I knew you guys just need to hear it. So let me take a second to just introduce this juggernaut of an individual, and then I'm going to give him a chance to blow your minds today. So, with over 25 years of experience as a licensed psychologist, organizational consultant, and executive coach, Eugene founded Dilan Consulting Group to help leaders build the kind of workspaces where people and performance thrive together. His philosophy is simple. Business is human. When leaders embrace that truth, they drive meaningful change that lasts. His career has taken him from Fortune 500 boardrooms to forward operating bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's supported leaders and teams facing high stakes decisions, fractured trust, and cultural transformation. He specializes in helping executive teams align strategy with behavior, resolve mission critical conflict, and build cultures of psychological safety and accountability. C-suite leaders engage him when people issues stall performance. Whether the challenge is misaligned leadership, poor management, inclusion concerns, or a culture that limits growth, he brings clinical precision, business fluency, and the courage to speak the unspoken. He always has a focus on enabling transformation across industries, including tech, biotech, aerospace, defense, and energy. He's helped organizations navigate change, build trust, and unlock the leadership capacity needed to compete in a complex world. At the core of his work is the belief in people's capacity to grow. And he doesn't offer quick fixes or check the box programs. Instead, he builds partnerships that moves leaders from intention to impact, from compliance to culture, and from surviving to leading. Guys, if that is not an introduction for the ages, like I don't know what is. I'm so excited. Again, Eugene, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. So shall we get started?
Yes, absolutely. For people that are not as familiar with you, give us a little bit of the backstory, because I really enjoyed hearing some of that when we met a little while ago. I would love to hear people understand the nature of how you have come to build such a personal and transformational consulting company that you run today.
I want to start by saying thank you to all the people along the way who have supported me and who have taught me and who have challenged me as well, because without all of those people who have leaned in and really, I think, giving me the knowledge, the support, the challenges, I don't know that I'd be where I am today. I started off my life very humbly in Brooklyn, New York. My parents moved from Puerto Rico. I'm born and raised in New York. And my family, no one had an advanced degree. I'm the first one to get a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate. I worked full-time through all of my degrees, and none of it was online. So sometimes I was working 40 hours, doing a 20-hour internship, doing schoolwork at night. Somehow, I don't know how I made it through, but I did. And I have to say that my journey started very early. When I was about 14, I participated in facilitating, I would say it wasn't called DEI then, but it was called race riots in Brooklyn. And my high school, which was comprised of 6,000 students, 500 showed up every day, was very diverse. Kids were bussed in from different neighborhoods, and it didn't always go as smoothly as it could have. And I was identified as a student leader. I was taken away and trained to do some facilitation, and it just kind of rooted in my DNA. And that combined with my love of theater, those two things, I finally realized that they were one and the same. A psychologist wants to understand what's driving behavior, and an actor needs to understand what's driving behavior. And so I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to be a psychologist because actors are all waiting tables in New York just as I was. And I was like, I cannot continue waiting tables. My family has sacrificed too much. And so long story short, that's kind of how I kind of got on this trajectory. But even like in grad school, I was facilitating, I was running a residence hall, waiting tables, going to school, um, all of it in the service of this work. And as a running a residence hall on campus, we had to train all of the resident assistants. We would show up a month before and develop trainings for them in order to teach them how to work with all the students. And so again, all of those little bricks kind of got me to this place. And then I struggled to get into the consulting world because had been managing nonprofits for quite some time. And I loved the work because it was mission focused, but I hated going to the same place every single day. I realized that the part that I loved was going in, building a team, fixing processes, getting more funding, connecting with the clients, but I hated being the stay guy once everything was in place. And so I had this aha moment, and then I couldn't get a job in consulting. And so one day I saw a newspaper ad in the APA Monitor, which is a newspaper for psychologists, and it was January, and it said, looking for clinical psychologists with management experience, deadline December 20 something. And I'm like, I missed the deadline. And I said, you know what? I'm going to apply anyway. And sure enough, within a few days, I got a call back. Within a week, we had spent several hours on the phone and I got a job offer. And off I was to my new life as a consultant internationally, working mostly in defense and nuclear and aerospace. And then about 10 years in, I realized that I wasn't learning, and I kind of felt that the values that were being espoused weren't really being lived. And that, to a large degree, was my motivation for going out on my own. Because I do believe that organizations that are congruent with their values and their behaviors create psychological safety for people because you're giving a consistent message through what you say and what you do. And that's what I've strived to kind of create here. And ideally, through our logo, our philosophy of business as human, hopefully we're bringing that to our clients as well. That was a mouthful. I'm sorry.
No, please don't apologize. I love it. Well, and hearing the story again, like I heard things differently. I think one of the things that I really admire about you, Eugene, is you took the opportunity that was in front of you, but like there was like this deep North Star that like kept you shifting and pivoting throughout the way, right? Whether it was like waiting tables in New York, like you were doing what other waiters or what other actors were doing. And so like it could have been very easy to just be like, well, this is what it's supposed to be. But there was something in you that was like, no, like there needs to be more. And so you made a shift. And then working in a very prestigious consulting manner, again, it'd be very easy to just be like, I'm an international consultant working on major projects, traveling the world. Like I've got it. But again, there was something that was just slightly misaligned with what you felt like you needed to do. And so again, you made a shift. And I really admire that. How is that like, how does that impact your consulting with your actual clients? Like does that come into consideration, or is that more just kind of like a personal life path thing?
I think it's both, Leanne, and that's a great question. I think, first of all, that whenever we're not living our values, that creates stress and that creates, I want to say, even physical conditions for us, trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. I think that each of us has intuition. And in Western society, more often than not, we're taught to focus on thinking, but our body has a way of knowing. And when the mind kind of overrides that, again, I think the body's pretty persistent and it cues you in that something isn't right. And with clients, very often, I will sense something in my gut. And maybe that's because I'm old and I have a lot of experience, but sometimes you pick up little subtle messages, what wasn't said, a little twitch of the eye, or just sometimes I feel someone's energy and I feel that I'm feeling like down and I'm like, I know that isn't me. So then that kind of informs me to ask a question about what are you feeling? Because I think sometimes the gut and the body picks up on things before the mind does. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice, I think, when we're not learning to pay attention to all of this information that's being given to us. Because again, that's how mankind has survived through the ages. It hasn't been because of this by itself. I'm pointing at my head. It's not just because of our intelligence. It's also because there's this other bit that's a different kind of intelligence that I think over the ages we used to listen to more and have been listening to less.
I love that. I totally agree, right? There's so many more signals than just the words that are being said or the thoughts that are being thought. Dig in with me with this for just a minute. You talked about like there you could feel it when there's a misalignment with values. Do you feel
Yeah.
like values are like we're born with the values or the values are chosen? How do we align with those values and what's the nature of values versus like the values we choose to live by? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. I kind of think that while we are not born as a tabula rasa, a blank slate, I don't know that we're born necessarily with values. Although to some degree, children are more free in that racism doesn't exist and ageism and children kind of are open to everything. And so as a psychologist, tend to think that our environments, so it could be whoever raised us, our religion of choice, it could be the communities that we were in, our schooling, all of that kind of begins to shape us. And I think in some ways, sometimes disconnects us from our true selves because I genuinely think that those values sometimes need to be challenged. I grew up in a certain environment and I left my home and started my own life. At some point, I think each of us has to pause and reflect and say, are the values that I inherited the ones that I want to drive my life and my behavior? Because I think that when we don't reflect and make that choice, I think we're not really living our true selves. So to some degree, again, I'm going to underscore, I think we inherit it from all kinds of things, but at some point, I think as adults, we have to make a conscious choice. And
Yeah.
then I think because our behaviors can kind of get into a little rhythm, we have to, again, reflect and pay attention to the fact that it's our responsibility to live in congruence to those values. But
Yeah.
I probably think also that as I've gotten older, my values have changed and they probably will continue to change because I say sometimes, Lisa Ann, that our stories are constantly being rewritten. And so what I mean by that is that as I have more experiences, I reinterpret what I've been through. And that reinterpretation sometimes leads to a shift in values. And so I think that if we hold on to something like it cannot change, I think we stop growing. And so I think we have to stay open to the idea that through experience, we can reevaluate and make choices around our values and our behavior.
I love that. Do you have either a personal experience or an experience from a client that you've had, like an example of that principle you just shared of being conscious of our values, where they come from, and being open to change? Like, I would love for you to share an experience of a belief that or a value that you had, an experience that led to it changing and the impact of that change. Does that make sense?
For me personally or for the client?
Either one. You pick.
Well, I'll start with me. And you mentioned in the start that I had done some work in Iraq and Kabul and Kandahar and Baghdad. And, I remember driving through Kabul and I'm in an armored vehicle in the back seat. They have Berettas, the semi-automatic weapons. I have a flak jacket on. Seeing the conditions that people were living in as a result of the war, I reflected on how desperate people do desperate things. And when I had that thought, that connected me back to the neighborhood that I grew up in. I grew up in a very tough neighborhood where drugs were sold, people would get mugged and hurt. People would get shot for their sneakers. And all of a sudden that connection of, people would say, how could somebody tie a bomb to their body? I'll tell you that desperate people do desperate things. And when you're worried about your family's food and welfare, a parent will do almost anything for their child. And so it didn't seem so far-fetched. All of a sudden it made sense. Similarly, even being embedded with the military at some points during that experience, I'm a liberal guy living in a liberal town. I've always lived in liberal cities, but people protecting me weren't always liberal. And all of a sudden, the idea of freedom, the idea of defending American values, that took on a whole other level of meaning for me, because sometimes it's easy to discount someone who is different than you or lives their lives differently than you and just think they're evil or stupid. But when people are willing to put their lives at risk to protect your life and your values, even when they disagree, wow, that again was transformational for me in terms of not being so quick to judge and recognizing that people are doing the best they can to live their own values, whether or not I agree with them. And so I think when you can shift that posture and that mindset, you can actually begin to have a different dialogue with someone. And you're not going from a place of othering, you're bad, you're racist, you're this, you're that. It's more of curiosity and more of acknowledging that we all have the capacity to grow and learn if we're willing to engage in dialogue. So that was a lot again.
No, I loved it. It was great. It was great, and I loved the imagery that was shared with the real experience that you had. Can I ask you a psychology question?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm curious. This question, I've never thought of this question before until our conversation today, but I want to know your thoughts on it. And it's also okay if you don't know the answer, but I think you will. What would you say is the difference between values and beliefs, and how do they
Mm,
influence each other?
wow. That's actually a hard question. I want to say that they're similar and different. For me, a value drives my behavior. I want to say that you've stumped me, Lisa Ann. I'm not sure that
I haven't meant to. Are they synonymous, or is it the same thing? Like, is values another word for belief?
I think in a lot of ways they are synonymous, because I do believe that values are informed by your beliefs. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? I'm not sure. But when I think of the definitions that I have for values, the word beliefs is in there. The beliefs that we have that help to guide our decisions and the way that we move through life. So I think in some ways they're synonymous. But I'll tell you that after this podcast, I'm going to Google or do a little AI research on this to
Yeah, well,
understand the difference.
it's
So
super interesting because you were talking about how values drive our belief, or values drive our actions and our behaviors. And I've been thinking a lot personally about how beliefs drive actions and behaviors, right? And how it takes a very short split second to change how you see a situation or how you believe about a situation to influence your whole perception of the quality of the situation or how you're approaching it or whatever. And so I was like, I wonder what the relationship is there. So I'm looking forward to a future
so
conversation with you about it, okay?
I actually did have a thought as I listened to you. In some ways, my values shape the beliefs that I have. Why am I saying that? Because my values are also the lens through which I see the world. And so I think that they're intricately connected, but I want to say that values come first. My values shape the way that I interpret the world or judge people or judge situations, and then that leads to beliefs. So I'm going to go with that.
Oh, so values lead to beliefs which influence our actions and behaviors. That's your
Yeah, yeah. Because if I have a value that family is important, then I might have a belief that family looks like this versus that, and then that's going to lead to judgments and behaviors. So I do think that I think that's the direction I'm gonna go with, but I'm still gonna double check myself later.
we're putting a flag in very flimsy sand on that one until we can come back and pour some concrete around
That's
it,
right.
huh?
That's right. Yeah, yeah,
No, I appreciate you going there with me. These are the kinds of things that I like to think about late at night. So
yeah.
I love it. Okay, so let's talk about the business for just a moment. So you have a consulting firm and you're bringing a rich psychological background as well as business acumen as well. Talk to me about who are your clients? Who do you serve? What types of problems do you solve? Give us a lay of the land business-wise, what you do.
Yeah. So, in terms of who we serve, everything from science, engineering, nonprofits, aerospace, defense, energy, accounting, law firms. Basically, our services are around developing people skills, leadership, how to manage conflict, how to delegate, how to motivate people, how to kind of lead from a growth mindset, how to help develop a growth mindset in others. So everything that we kind of impart to our clients is grounded in psychology and behavior. And so again, I think it works in every single environment that you can think of. The kind of problems that we solve, I'll give you an example. I just got a phone call from a client I hadn't worked with in 20 years, whose name I shall not mention. She said, Eugene, if you can't help this person, nobody can. And so apparently this person has been charged with an international project and is having some behavioral issues. And so that's the kind of high level executive who is leading a team that's multicultural, where I might get involved. But it could be as simple as working with the C-suite. My team might coach the different members of the C-suite. I'll come in and do some team development. The team might be going through some sort of organizational transformation, so I might help them to look at the culture of the organization, or look at what do they need to do in order to scale their services. And more often than not, the organizations are going through some kind of transformation, is what I would say, or somehow they're feeling that they're not executing as best as they could. And more often than not, Lisanne, what I find is that organizations tend to have the technical assets that they need to be successful, but it's the human component that always gets them stuck. Again, whether it's how do you give feedback where you don't alienate somebody and create enemies? How do you do it in a way where it becomes part of the way that we work together, so it's not personal,
Mm,
so that you feel that you're being supported and at the same time being held accountable, at the same time being challenged to step up, because that's how you move things forward. How do you bridge gaps in communication? Some people are introverted, some people are extroverted, some people are high energy, some people are low energy, some people are direct, some people are not. So what can you do so that everyone has the permission to bring their best self in terms of who they are, and at the same time recognize that the word relationship means that there's a give and take? And I think that's where people get stuck sometimes. This is how I am. I have good intentions, but the path to hell is paved with good intentions, as many people say. And so, despite my good intentions, sometimes I need to temper my own behavior. Like, I know, Lisa Ann, that I'm an extrovert to the nth degree. And when I'm not mindful, I can overwhelm someone. And so I work on that, and I pay attention to people's body language. And, if I sense that they've gone silent, or somehow their body language is cueing me in, I try to temper myself. And most of us have the capacity to do that and don't, because we're not paying attention. Sometimes I think organizations struggle because there's such a focus on the goals, on the outcomes, that we forget about the relationship part. We forget about the relationship part and how that's ultimately the enabler. And we have to pay attention to both, because when we're paying attention to both, I think we can move at the speed of sound. But when one of those is lagging, it slows us down.
I love that. That's really brilliant. When you start to have a conversation with people, do you find with organizations, do you find that they are aware of the problems that they're facing, or is there often a discovery process that needs to happen to really understand what the root issue is in the first place? Like they just how does that normally work?
Well, that is a great question, and I'll tell you why. I have a thing in my own head that says, beware someone who's self-diagnosed and self-prescribed, because they're drinking their own Kool-Aid. And so I'm a big believer in that you have to right size discovery, right size meaning based on how much time you have and how much money you have, and the urgency of the situation. Sometimes you have to go quick and dirty. However, no matter what, you need to do some discovery of your own. And I'll tell you that when you don't do discovery and the client does not get what they wanted, it's your fault, even if you solved for something that wasn't really the problem. And so before you go in an engagement and say, and the client says, here's what it is, and here's what you do. I'm always like, time out. Wait a minute. Show me your data. Show me how you got there. Because more often than not, I believe that we are always co-creating. And sometimes we don't realize what our contribution has been to that problem. I also believe that individual behavior drives group norms, shapes organizational culture. And so sometimes, or most of the time, the part that we can really do something different about is the part that we're contributing. It's very easy to point the finger and say, let me tell you about yourself and what you're doing wrong. But there's three fingers always pointing back at you when you do that. And so what is your contribution? In psychology, there's this term, the locus of control, and that means that's the part that you really have agency over. And so I believe that you have to help people to look at their own contribution. And I also think that when you do that, like at a team offsite, and you're challenging the CEO and everyone to look at their own contribution, somehow it changes the dynamic in that it's not my problem, it's our problem to solve. All of a sudden it's different. We're back to being a team versus competitors versus blamers. So that co-creation is important in terms of a shift in mindset that I think can truly, truly move the dynamics on a team.
I love that. I love that. Can I ask you a question about locus of control?
Yes.
So I've always considered myself as like having like a pretty high. It's if you have a high locus of control, you believe that like you are more in control of the situation, like you're not just a product of your circumstance.
Yes.
Like, but do you find with business leaders that like even if they have a belief that there's a high locus of control, that when it comes to issues, conflict, or problems, that they actually tend to have a low locus of control because they want to remove responsibility from self and put it onto other people? Or do you feel like if you have a high locus of control, you tend to be more willing to take responsibility? Like, how does that work when it comes to looking at the hard stuff?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that what we're talking about to some degree speaks to impulse control. It speaks to self awareness, emotional intelligence. All of those elements are part of this. And some people are easily triggered. So when you're easily triggered, it's very easy to get into a win lose dynamic. I do think that people who have a greater belief in locus of control may or may not have good impulse control. And locus of control, again, I would say for me, there are things I control, again, on a personal level that are around the way that I think, the way that I feel, my behaviors. And then I think there's the delusion that we have control over some things that we absolutely do not. We don't cause other people's feelings. We don't cause other people's behaviors. We might have done something inappropriate or mean or whatever, but someone also has to have impulse control over their own behavior, and one bad does not justify another. And so what I would say is that I don't know that locus of control is the same thing as impulse control or emotional intelligence. And so what we believe does not always translate into behavior, I guess, in some
Yeah.
ways. And I find that the higher you go in an organization, the less feedback you tend to get. And so the more that you need to find that trusted person who is going to tell the emperor you have no clothes.
The higher
And
the
I'll tell you that,
delusion, right?
yes. And some leaders can't tolerate it. I've lost a client or two along the way because I've been candid. And you know what? I have no regrets about being candid because I have to live with my integrity. I work for a living because I need to pay for stuff. I love my work, but I don't want to compromise my integrity. And so at some point, if I feel that I've genuinely tried and I can't penetrate, then I disengage. I'm kind of like, this isn't working for me or for you. Some people want to bring in a consultant and tell them what to do and when to do it. And again, that doesn't feel constitutionally right for me. And again, I don't think that that's genuinely serves the client either.
I love that. That's so good. Integrity is a huge value that I hold as well, and so I really identify with that. So what you're incredibly smart. Like, I am really enjoying this conversation. What are some of your goals? Like, what are you wanting to do with the Dilan Consulting Group? Like, what's on your horizon for the next 12 months?
Yeah. So I would say that over the last almost 15 years, we've had ups and downs and ups and downs. And my goal is to create more steadiness in terms of those peaks and valleys. I'm wanting to bring in a little more technology. I've struggled because of my value of business being human and wanting to provide high touch. And so my goal is really to, again, bring in a little more technology and systems and processes so that we can scale again. I think that I'm coming around to the idea that I have to embrace some things that I didn't want to embrace, like social media, for instance. I've been doing a lot of work in that area over the last year and a half, whereas in the past I really resisted it. And then I had an aha moment where I realized this is the world we live in, and like it or not, you better get good at it, Eugene. And so I've gotten a lot better at it. I've gotten some support in that area. And now we have a lot of content online and different platforms, and it's making a difference in terms of raising our profile and I think solidifying our brand. And so I feel like now I'm at a place where, similarly with technology, I'm looking to see where are the places where I won't lose my value of business as human, a high touch, and at the same time, it'll help us to, I think, to even improve our level of service with clients.
I love that. So, and you're speaking the majority of like bringing technology into the delivery side of the business? Is that what you're referring to?
I do a little bit of that, but it's more around the backside of the business. We're a small shop, and we've invested in different things, and there are some things that we haven't invested in. And so, I want to make sure that, like, I don't have a coaching portal, for instance. That's something I've just hired someone. And so historically we use Dropbox for all of that. But when you start having multiple clients with multiple, and so in the next, month or so, we're going to be rolling out a portal where each coach is going to be able to log in and find their clients divided by company. The packages are different depending on the client, and I'll be able to easily run a report and be able to status clients on, these people have done 5, they've done 10, and it'll give me an easier way of also to follow up even with the coaches in terms of what they're doing. So something like that, whereas historically we use Dropbox and resources are in there, and we're tracking things on a spreadsheet. That's a waste of time. And so, and to some degree, it's also putting the onus back on the coaches as they go along. So that's one example of something. We're refreshing the website. So actually, we're going completely new because historically we've updated, and more recently they said there's been so many updates that technology wise we need to start from scratch. So sometime the next month or two, the new website will be rolled out, and around the same time, we'll have a separate website portal for the coaches. And so I'm doing things like that. And there's a few other projects that I have on the dashboard that I want to try and get done before the end of the year.
I love it.
In terms of, by the way, I really do need to make some kind of an assessment of where I can plug that in more. So far, I use it with creating content, verifying when I build a workshop, what's missing, what could make this go better, crunching numbers. My marketing person uses it a lot in terms of creating things for all the social platforms. But I want to look at, again, where can I plug it in terms of my processes? And
Mhm.
in terms of automating some of that. And the other thing that I've done is during some of my leadership programs, I have clients pull out their own laptops, and I'll say, here are the models that you learned. Say, here are the models I learned. And now write down a challenge that you're having and ask AI to help you to utilize those models in terms of addressing the challenge. So I've been doing a little bit of that with clients as well, because they don't have me 24 hours a day. And so if, most of the models that we use are not proprietary, they're out there in the ether. The ones that are proprietary, they have permission to upload them, because if you can kind of create a space where all of that content is available to you, then you can readily kind of before you do something that might end up backfiring, just kind of a little coach on your shoulder, thinking of doing this, or I'm thinking of sending this email and I'm really pissed off. Well, there are ways that you can temper yourself. And even if you don't go with what comes up there, just the fact that you pause to reflect is going to help you to make a better choice. AI is here, and it's not going anywhere. It saddens me that we, like social media, we haven't set any parameters in this country. I think Europe is doing a better job. So I do think that we're heading in the same direction of it's going to cause a lot of problems as well. Hopefully the benefits will outweigh the problems, but I do think that it is going to cause some problems as well, especially I think for really young people. There is a tolerance that we develop for frustration when we're trying to solve problems and issues. And if we preempt that, are we preempting young people's ability to tolerate frustration or tolerate the unknown? I'm coming into this as an older guy that already has built that. But what if everybody just has everything available at their fingertips? Young ones, will they ever really be able to learn to tolerate that?
Wow. Yeah. Deep thoughts and considerations. And I'm grateful that we have got great minds that are thinking of those hard concepts instead of just like letting whatever happens, right? Awesome. Eugene, it has seriously been I'm looking at the time and I can't even believe how long we've been talking. This has been an amazing conversation and it's been such a joy having you on the Marketing Matrix today. And so thank you for bringing your experience, your expertise, your heart, your values on the podcast today. It really has been an absolute joy speaking to you.
Thank you so much. And is it okay to say where people can find me?
Yes, that's my next question. Yeah, tell us how people can find you.
DilanConsulting.com,
Sorry, start again.
DilanConsulting.com, DilanConsulting.com. Follow us on Instagram. Follow me personally on LinkedIn, and please follow the company as well, because that's usually where new insights and new, I think, resources are posted first. So if you want to be first, and if you go to my website, there are all kinds of ebooks. I just put out a new ebook on building high-performing teams. I recently put out a two-parter on the future of DEI, which I'm calling Belonging and Inclusion. There's a good one on change management. So if you want resources, they're free. Just go to the website.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Eugene. I'm going to have all those links, guys, in the episode notes below the episode. And so please go ahead and check those and follow Eugene. And if you're a business owner listening to this and can use his coaching and help, then please do. Again, Eugene, it has been such a joy having you on the podcast today. And it's just been a joy spending time with you as a human being. And
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate you bringing business as human to this podcast. You embodied that philosophy very well for us today.
Thank you so much, Lisanne. I really appreciate the opportunity.